You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hey everybody, this is Tristra Newyear Yeager, the strategist and writer for Rock, Paper, Scissors, and you are back joining us for another episode of Music Tectonics. And this episode is going to be a little different. First of all, you have me, your regular Irregular host, and then we have a little surprise, an irregular host. Oh my gosh, do not say that 5 times fast. Eleanor Rust, who is our amazing director of marketing and also a scholar of classics and a brilliant mind all around.
Oh, thanks, Tristra.
Yeah, so Eleanor is one of the most amazing folks at RPS, which is filled with amazing people. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some issues that may seem a little meta for a music tech podcast, but they actually are quite relevant to the times. We're all facing some challenges right now. Many of us are a little sad that we can't meet our colleagues in person. And anyway, we are in a global business now that's increasingly global, scattered, and filled with people who need to communicate remotely in interesting ways and collaborate remotely, sometimes using even audio formats that used to require people to be in an intimate setting in a studio, such as we are right now, or to be, in at least in the same geographical location. So, with the cancellation of a lot of meetings coming up, with a lot of opportunities for us to get together and hang together in person, put on pause for the time being, wisely so. We wanted to dig a little bit into the art and craft of remote communication and collaboration, which is something we do every day at Rock, Paper, Scissors. And I'm sure a lot of you do out there, whether you're talking about a dev team or communications with partners or other far-flung people.
And if you haven't been doing it, you're going to start doing it now.
Yeah, for better or for worse. So one thing that sparked this interest in this topic was something that I often pester Eleanor with random articles that I find that are really interesting, that are a little bit outside of our basic wheelhouse at RPS. But one thing I found was ICANN is holding their first global conference in a virtual setting. So instead of having everybody in a room, they decided they were going to try to do this via technology. And they had a really interesting set of tips about how to make the most of a virtual meeting. And some of them are pretty basic, like be on mute when you get on, which is like,
use a headset.
Yeah.
Say your name.
Some stuff that is absolutely like, a great foundation. And as someone who has heard all sorts of exciting things going on in the background in people's lives, the mute button is indeed your friend, and it's been my friend in many cases. See the incident with the tornado sirens and the baby.
Oh.
Yeah, but one really cool thing that they brought up that I loved was that they pointed out that they're dealing with a global community, and there are a lot of different cultures coming to the table, and they have different communication styles. And I'm just going to quote directly, without the benefit of facial expressions and body language, misunderstandings can occur. And then they go on to say, try to be succinct when interacting virtually to avoid miscommunications, which is kind of mean.
Well, it's a real challenge, especially for people with different communication styles. We were just talking a little bit about how some cultural backgrounds, it's really important to talk around a subject. It's really important to add all these linguistic softeners like, to involve other people in the conversation, but don't really have an easy translation in other languages. Actually, thinking about being succinct is really hard.
Yes, and I'm sure there are instances where that's not as big a deal, but in general, I think it's an interesting guideline. And I want to go back, though, to something that would actually make it a little hard to be quite so straight and to the point, and that is trying to wrap our brains around how cultural differences play into remote communication. We have clients from all over the world, and before that, as everyone probably knows, we were involved with musicians who hailed from all sorts of backgrounds all around the planet. And so figuring out ways to communicate with people you can't see and you may not know, who are coming from cultural milieu that you know nothing about, is a real challenge of remote communication. So
it requires a lot of empathy, and empathy that only has one trigger, which is that sound that you're getting across on the phone or through the headset.
And video can help, but it also can be difficult if someone's dealing with limited capacity to to send video, and video can get awfully wonky, awfully fast.
So what are some tips that you've learned over the years communicating remotely with clients from other cultural backgrounds? Do you have any insight that you can share with people who are struggling with the same issue right now?
I think to contradict, I can a little bit. Brevity may not be your friend in this case, especially if it's a relatively new connection or it's someone that you're trying to break new ground with. I would give yourself a little extra time and space to just shoot the shit. And at least with more, I mean, again, everyone's a little different and you have to feel people out, but just getting to know somebody and trying to find some common ground that maybe isn't directly on topic, whether it's, I don't know. I mean, in America, we love to talk about our pets. Midwesterners, we love to talk about the weather because it's always different every 5 seconds. So just finding some human topic that reaffirms your humanity and builds a little bit of that rapport between people. So almost always you can find some overlap with people, even people from very, 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 very different backgrounds, and who are coming to you with a different set of expectations or an agenda that is, you know, widely divergent from yours. There's always something you have in common, and taking the time to find that is really important.
What do you think about talking about differences? Does that come in handy, or do you prefer to focus on what's common?
I think that can be really handy, especially if you're having trouble, like if, say, you keep interrupting each other by accident.
I've had this conversation.
I am an interrupter. I am a talk overer. And that can often rub people the wrong way if they don't know that I'm just really, really, really excited about what they have to say. And I can't wait to either affirm that or to, you know, zig a little bit in a different direction so we can take the conversation somewhere else, just mildly, without saying that I'm not listening to them. But not everybody is a simultaneous listener and talker. So I think it is, maybe there should be a set of, you know, maybe you kind of run through beforehand, you know, when you're collaborating with someone for the first time. This is my work style. I tend to talk a lot. Feel free to interrupt me. You know, shout loud if I'm getting off topic. Really give people permission to intervene if you are not suiting their needs. So, and that's another good point about thinking about communication style. If you have someone who's a little more reserved, who is a person of few words, maybe make conscious space for that person in a meeting.
And you only learn about their style if you really can spend time with them, spend time shooting that shit.
Exactly. And, you know, there's a lot of room for misunderstandings if that person feels like they didn't get an opportunity just because you have two very excitable chatterboxes who are going at it and have no problem just taking up all the airspace. So I think the way you would in a meeting, I mean, maybe not calling people out, like be like, so Bruce, what do you have to say? I mean, that's always a shitty thing to do. But find a way ahead of time to be like, you know, Bruce, I would love to hear your input on this if you have anything to say. And then Bruce can always say like, nope. If that's what Bruce wants to do.
Those sound like skills you've developed from years of interviewing.
I love interviewing, and it's actually funny. Anyone who knows me knows that once I get going, like now, I can talk for a long time. Interviewing is one of those things that makes me do the opposite of my instincts, which is listen. And listening is really, really one of the most, for me, this is going to sound a little cheesy. I'm going to get a little woo here. It's very life affirming to really listen to what another person says. One thing I know, if you're like me and you're a little bit scattershot when it comes, like your brain is going in 50 directions, I find it really helpful to take near verbatim notes during meetings or during interviews. So if there's an important group discussion that you have going on virtually and you're really distractible, that's okay. Just find a way for you to engage by taking really detailed notes, and you'll probably come out with a really great summary of what everyone discussed anyway. And that's a huge asset in these virtual meetings because they can just flow by and you have no idea what everyone just talked about.
Right. And your mind can then really respond to what's being said on a deeper level, rather than, I have the same problem of wanting to jump off to a different direction. So I learned about taking detailed notes as that sort of almost meditative focus during grad school. that I would tend to want to, chase rabbits down holes, but taking those detailed notes helps engage a deeper part of your brain, it feels like.
Absolutely. And the since we're talking about a music tech podcast, the audio stuff. I know we totally. It's more just like join Eleanor and Tristra for some tea, and we'll chat. But we also need to think about the audio quality, and there are things that make it really hard to hear you and listen to you.
Yeah.
So if you are in a space that's super loud, especially if you're speaking a language that's not your native language, and you need to hear everybody, like really try to maybe encourage people ahead of time. You could even, I would even think it would be okay to reach out and be like, I'm pretty good. I'm a pretty good French speaker, but I'm not completely fluent. So if everyone could make sure you're not in the middle of a construction site, that would be really great. So I think that we're going to have to develop a whole etiquette around, just enabling maximum listening.
Yeah.
And minimizing distractions.
Yeah, and at least for folks who are interested, who are in the music industry, at least that's not a secondary concern the way it is for many people in business. We want the technology to be transparent when we're doing conference calls and remote work. We want it to disappear, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, and if you like to mess with audio, then like conference calls, or maybe that's a new opportunity to explore.
Yeah, right. We've got connectivity. Now can we get quality?
And, that's a big, we've had a past, actually a future client as well, Soundwhale, and they have worked really hard on reducing things like latency. And latency is a big, bugaboo for some of us, in that, especially if you're dealing with overseas communications, it can be very strange because you keep stepping on people all the time because they haven't actually finished that phrase, but you're just getting it. A lot of strange, jittery things can happen. So
so tell me more about Soundwhale. I mean, now we want to get a little bit back to the real music tech side of this. That right now, everybody's being forced into remote work and collaboration in ways that they might not be comfortable with. But that's probably the frontier, not just because of global crises, but because there's so many opportunities now that you can collaborate with people across the globe. And it sounds like Soundwhale is trying to drive that forward for music.
Yeah, there's some interesting differences between asynchronous and synchronous communication, and especially when you're dealing with audio. So there's been a ton of asynchronous collaboration around the world forever, sending files back and forth. Maybe not forever, like 15, 20 years, right?
It feels like forever.
Feels like, oh my God, it's been forever. But now the interesting thing that's happening is because of connectivity, whether it's not even 5G, it's using, earlier generations of mobile data. There's a lot of interesting stuff that you can do now where you can really get the latency down like low enough so that collaboration in real time synchronously is possible, which is really great because it's really, really hard to be like, okay, that was a nice voiceover, but could you do it like this? And it's like 8 hours later, so the person's
right.
The moment is super important, in that feedback, that rapport. And so Soundwhale is basically there's a couple of folks working on this, so these are just the people we know the best, so take that as a caveat, but they've worked really hard to create the software that allows pretty intuitive synchronous collaboration via audio. And I think that is something kind of like what's happening with AI and identification or similarity search. That's one of those new technologies that's going to start seeping in all over the place. And people may even build other products on top of that capacity. I also know that there's, a lot of folks are trying to move sound recording really, really firmly onto mobile.
That would be huge.
Yeah. I mean, there's already tons of, ways you can do little bits and pieces, but to bring it all together into one dedicated sort of workspace would be really, really amazing. And maybe you don't need something as heavy as Pro Tools, but you might need something more sophisticated than voice notes, or and you can put GarageBand on a tablet. You can do all sorts of interesting things, but there's a lot of cool stuff happening right now that I think will help us collaborate more together, so that maybe there's some ways we can fill in the gaps between in-person jam sessions or performances. And
that sounds fantastic. So thinking about putting workstations on phones so you don't have to just use voice notes to record notes and then take it to a different environment, that makes it sound like anybody could make music.
Yes.
We've been talking a little bit about what a future might sound like when instant creation is just in the air, is just a normal part of life, and what might change about how we relate to music.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've been talking about, on Music Tectonics and on our blog has been, related to more of a lean back experience. But it was really funny. I was reading, a couple weeks ago, Mark Mulligan had a piece about the age of the artist, which was really exciting, and talking about sort of the empowerment of artists and how the power balance has really shifted notably in their favor, which is great. On the other side, I was thinking, well, what if, but also the line between artist and non-artist, quote unquote, consumer, which for some of us who love music dearly always have a little bit of a problem with that word in the music context, but that's a whole other conversation. So consumers are becoming artists and artists are becoming consumers. The line is blurring much more severely or intensely than it was even like 5 years ago.
I think Dimitri has a seismic shift trading card to that effect.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, that people think about stuff like TikTok, they think about, some of the goofier, more ephemeral things. And I think there's going to be some pretty deep expression of people's humanity that they may or may not choose to preserve. Just like we don't always want to save our, just like Snapchat kind of really tuned into that. And more sort of ephemeral social media is out there. At the same time, it's like, why would I want anyone to know about this moment where I came to terms with maybe something quite personal, whether it's like grief or anger or disappointment. But music is, an incredible soother, an incredible medium for expressing things that are difficult to put into words. And I could see with this new technology coming out, people could make all sorts of interesting things from parts that could be supplied by people who are maybe more specialist, but that are inherently modifiable in some simple ways that allow for great flexibility of emotional expression and coming to terms with people's humanity in the moment.
And that really goes back to a deep history of what music has meant for people, both socially and individually. That it's really a blip in human history that we've been able to record and share professionals making music at the expense of just normal everyday people doing what they do.
Yeah, it's funny. We often hear people very upset about what has happened with the shift to digital music and the fact that there's no quote unquote middle class musicians anymore. And yet we don't really have great historical data that this would be really difficult to execute. So there's a reason why we don't have it, but we don't really know that we can't compare numerically, like how many people were making what kind of living from music. And a lot of the economic exchange probably was not captured in any way, shape, or form without doing some sort of insane deep dives into like the archives of some like prominent studio in LA or something like that, and all the receipts.
I've been looking at Breughel paintings lately, and there's so many depictions of village festivities or weddings where there's just some people playing bagpipes. And how were those guys paid? Did they farm during the day and bagpipe at night? Did they just bagpipe all day long and get paid pennies? We don't know.
A lot of specialist musicians were extremely marginalized. I'm thinking about the kobzars, like the blind minstrels in Ukrainian tradition. These were people that kind of wandered around and played songs, some of them kind of earthy, some of them very religious, some of them kind of heroic, but you kind of got, some food and maybe someone let you sleep in their barn and then, but you could end up sleeping in the ditch that night. Right. I mean, it is
not... and a lot of traditions, professional musicians they're necessarily liminal, marginal, that there's something culturally powerful about having people who don't have a strongly identified social role in their community.
Yeah. And anyway, so we've seen really a golden age in the last 125 years of professional musicians. And obviously there's so much progress to be made in that realm. And I don't want to belittle anyone's efforts or upset at, the ongoing imbalances and need for adjusting. However, if you look back at the way people used to make music, the most music you had to just make it yourself. And even if it was kind of like, I'm just going to take this piece of grass and hum a melody because I'm bored off my butt, or I have to do this really
The sheep
annoying
are really
thing.
boring today.
Yeah,
I gotta
there's
make my own fun.
Exactly. Like, I have to walk for 12 miles. I better come up with something to distract myself from the fact that I'm like wearing really uncomfortable boots and like trotting through about 5 inches of mud.
I mean, we can't wash our hands for 20 seconds without trying to think about what song we're going to sing.
Exactly. So, everybody needed these prompts and these ways of getting your mind off of difficulty, and or celebrating this amazing moment that you're feeling, or just like, it's a beautiful day. You go outside, you're like, I walked out one May morning. Like, how many folk songs in the English language begin with "I walked out one May morning," and then all this other
end with
weird shit
illegitimate
happened.
offspring. I was driving home last night and I saw a dog and I just had to sing about it.
There you go.
Yeah, that moment is lost in time forever. A little ephemeral music creation.
And if we could somehow make these songs really, really fun, like there's maybe you need some beats to like really pay tribute to that dog's awesome, puppleness.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many. I mean, imagine if it was just easy enough to just put that out into the world for a brief moment, to share it with somebody across the globe and then have it fade away. And your lives would still be better for it.
I think so. I think there could be a new way of, it could be a little thing you send to your friends. It could be somebody else really loves writing dog songs, and you find out you have like a buddy in Sri Lanka who is really into writing songs about animals they see by the side of the road. And like, before you know it, your life is better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the working, we may get back to a new age of this kind of folk music 2.0, where it's people making music in the moment from the materials they have on hand. They just happen to be digital materials.
Right. With their friends, for their friends, celebrating that moment.
Exactly. And just having a really good time together and, laughing and, it's the ingenuity, human ingenuity is really amazing. And so we need to provide people with the tools to, take that ingenuity and have fun with it and revel in it, as opposed to making people just, sending people down these channels, whether it's like a newsfeed type channel or a really regimented technology product that only produces certain kinds of results. And I think that openness, without an infinite amount of choice, but with a limited but very interesting amount of choices, can give people all sorts of opportunities.
I love it. I feel like we saw a few sort of glimmers of this future at the AI's Got Talent session at the Music Tectonics Conference in October 2019. I think that was many people's favorite session, because we saw demos in which they were really focused on giving people who don't think of themselves as musicians. I'm thinking, I guess, particularly of what Dave Park said, or maybe, and also Alex Mitchell of Boomy, that people who don't think of themselves as musicians still want to express themselves musically. And we're getting closer to that future where they feel like they can express themselves in these interesting ways.
One interesting thing too is I think interfaces will hopefully could evolve to meet these needs, and we could get away from, a lot of the way things are designed now have to do with the way studios looked and the kind of layout and needs an audio engineer would have. If you're not an audio engineer, you can totally take a bunch of multicolored triangles and pile them up. You can have a big rainbow colored thing that you swipe with your finger, and it makes these different colors that reflect certain, basically we're looking at graphic user interfaces that have a synesthetic quality, which I think is something that could really spark people's imaginations musically. So there's so many fun things that could happen. But remember, whenever you go into a teleconference, start on mute.
That's the real takeaway here, people. Well, I'm really looking forward to a collaborative future for music and a collaborative future for all kinds of work, really. Yeah, and it's we live in that weird time when we know all this stuff that we probably never really needed to know about other parts of the world, meaning like they had a really bad hurricane and bad stuff happened, and that can really weigh on people's minds. But the wonderful thing that we get to do is we get to really get to know some people that we would have never ever encountered
in our lives, and
make beautiful music.
and
with
make
them.
music together with them
Aw.
about dogs and things that we like. All right, on that cheery note, everybody, thanks for sitting in with us and our little conversation. I hope that wherever you are, you're healthy and that you have a great headset for your next virtual meeting. And we'll catch you on the flip side.
But we also want to remind you that we have a newsletter. If you already subscribe, you know that you get something from me about every 2 weeks. You can go to the Music Tectonics website to sign up for that. And that's also where you will first hear about a Music Tectonics conference updates. We're still planning a lot of exciting things to announce in the coming months about October's conference. So get on my newsletter. Hear from me every couple weeks.
Okay, thanks, everybody. It was great to talk to you, Eleanor.
Great to talk to you, Tristra. Bye.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.